This presentation is about ways to teach and to learn that we'll call perspective. The video has been recorded after my talk at SAPEM in Stockholm, and I will take the field of acoustical porous material as an example, but it can be applied to any field of knowledge. So you may have noticed that students of the new generation do not want to spend hours reading books to learn things, and managers of the new generation and or the old ones do not want to spend hours reading reports to take a decision. And obviously it's not yet possible to acquire knowledge without making any effort. So we have to find new ways or new perspectives for them to understand what we are doing in our research work. The first way or the first perspective to learn things is by reading. It may be reading books, like in our field of research, the second edition of Propagation of Sound in Porous Media, or the book by Jean-Louis Oriot, Claude Boutin, and Christian Gindreau, as two examples. It can also be reading articles, like the one by Johnson, Koplik, and Daschen. But one drawback of this first perspective is the fact that there's more and more content, more and more books or more and more articles, while in the meantime researchers say that they do not publish enough. And it's more and more complicated, it's more and more difficult to find the information we are looking for. So it has changed our reading experience, and in fact it has also changed our everyday reading experience. And nowadays we do not read text usually, we scan it, due to this mass of information. And I'm pretty sure that you have first seen these words, we scan, then after you have read the title of this slide, which is How do we read text today? And now you are starting to read the paragraph, which states exactly the same thing, that usually we do not read text, we scan it. Because of the mass of information, so we are looking for keywords, and a text should catch our attention before a deeper reading of it. The idea behind this slide is borrowed from Mike Morgan, and there's an important additional information or idea behind this slide, which I borrow it from Brett Victor, and which states that writing an article or writing a book is like making some kind of compression of the information we have acquired during a long time research, and we are trying to transmit this information to someone who do not necessarily have the tool to unzip this data. And so it may solve the problem to offer multiple perspectives or media to transmit the information. One proposition to enhance our reading experience is called Telescopic Text by its author, which is Joe M.L. Davis. The idea is to go from keywords to details. So this idea is not new. What is really new is the tool which is used to make it real. So I will show you a quick example here. We have three short sentences on the screen. Sound-absorbing materials dissipate energy, the required open porosity, the size of their pores should be of the order of 10 to 500 micrometers. There's some keywords in these sentences, and when I click on them, I will get some extra text. So, sound-absorbing materials dissipate energy, mainly by viscoinertial and thermal effects. They required open porosity. Why? For the sound wave to propagate through their microstructure and dissipate the acoustic energy. The size of their pores, which is also called a characteristic length, because strictly speaking, some acoustical porous materials do not have pores, like fibrous ones, for example. So characteristic length should be of the order of 10 to 500 micrometers. Why? For the viscoinertial and thermal effects to occur in the audible frequency range, which is almost 20 to 20 kHz. Another proposition which derives from the telescopic text is to be able to switch between notation. So we have almost all experienced this frustrating moment when we find a good book and talking about the subject we are looking for, but the author of this book uses a different notation than the one we are familiar with. So we have to make some efforts to understand the equations and to translate them into the notation we are familiar with. So here is a simple example. where I just say that the harmonic propagation of sound in fluids is described by the Helmholtz equation, and here we have the Helmholtz equation using the Nabla notation. But I can switch, if I prefer, to the Leibniz notation, so the equation change to the Leibniz notation, and I just add some text just to say that this is the equation using Leibniz notation, but for a 3D Cartesian coordinate system. If you prefer to go for words, it's also possible to switch the notation for words, and then this slide change to the harmonic propagation of sound in fluids is described by an equation which is called the Helmholtz equation, and the general solution of this equation corresponds to the superposition of two waves propagating in opposite directions. In this slide I show you another proposition to enhance our reading experience, which is based on what Brett Victor called reactive documents. So you may have already seen this slide in the past because I use it to show what we are able to do at Methodist. So from a cell, which is representing the structure of a porous material, so it's in violet we can see the skeleton phase of a porous material. We can compute elastic parameters such as the Young modulus, for example, assuming the material is isotropic and homogeneous, of course. We can also compute thermal conductivity and acoustic parameters or acoustic properties. For example, here we'll show you the sound absorption coefficient for a given sample thickness as a function of the frequency here. What is important here is the fact that this idealized cell is in fact a 3D object, so I can rotate it and you can better understand what is the geometry we are looking at in this slide. And the other important thing is the fact that I can change the strut thickness here from 10 microns to another value, and it computes the new elastic parameters, the new elastic modulus, and the new thermal conductivity and the new sound absorption coefficient for a given thickness. So here we can see that as we increase the strut thickness, we increase the elastic modulus and the thermal conductivity because we have less porosity, of course, and we also decrease the sound absorption coefficient for this particular example. So these are not real-time computation, as I use empirical laws to compute the elastic parameters and the thermal conductivity. And I also use an empirical law to compute static airflow resistivity from the idealized cell. And from this static airflow resistivity, I compute in real time the sound absorption coefficient in diffuse sound field following the model by Delany, Basley, Mickey. So far we have seen example of the first perspective, which was reading, books, articles, and website. As the solutions have shown were running inside a website. A second perspective to learn or to teach is lectures. So I think you are all familiar with lectures, so I will not give any example of this. I just asked during the conference if there were any regular lecture on acoustic porous media, and I got two answers, one from the Le Mans University and one from University of Ferrara in Italy. The third perspective I would like to talk to you about is a poster, and I will add to this third perspective comics. Usually when people get the answer after an abstract submission to a conference that they will have a poster rather than an oral presentation, they are often sad about that. While it's an interesting way to show your work to use a poster. I will not show you an example of a poster, but I will show you two pictures which are my visual definition of the static viscous permeability K0 and the static thermal permeability K prime 0. K0 links the pressure drop at both ends of a porous sample, which is depicted here by SpongeBob, to the velocity of the flow which go through this porous sample. I've added at the bottom of this slide the equation which gives the definition of K0. You can refer to a good book or a good article to have the exact definition of all terms in this equation. K prime 0 links the pressure variation with time to the excess of temperature τ in the fluid phase of the porous material. So we can see Here around time t1 there's a given pressure variation with time, and so there's a corresponding excess of temperature tau. Around time t2 there's another variation of the pressure with time, and so the value of the excess of temperature tau is different. So at the bottom of this cartoon I have added the equation which give the exact definition of k prime 0. So this was the third perspective, posters and or comics. And now we will go for the fourth perspective, which is also the one from the title of my presentation, the game perspective. I will show you an arcade video game which is still a work in progress, for which we can learn things about the science of acoustical porous material. On the screen we can now see a white circle on a blue background. So this white circle depicts a fluid particle. We can see that we control this particle and it undergoes deformations when it bumps into the wall, meaning that this is a fluid particle according to the Lagrangian description of a fluid particle, as opposed to the Eulerian one. Why a Lagrangian particle? Because it follows the same molecules in their path, so our fluid particle undergoes deformations with time. A second point is the fact that we can see bonuses in yellow at the bottom of the screen, and when we hit bonuses we get the knowledge about a new parameter. Here it's the static airflow resistivity, so we can discover new material, and in particular fibrous materials, because according to the model by Delany-Basley or Delany-Basley-Mickey, the static airflow resistivity is the only parameter required to describe their acoustic behavior. I will reload the game so you can also see that there's a shake of the screen here. This is a compressional wave which is going through our medium, and of course if we were into a foam with the knowledge of the elastic parameters, we will have seen three waves, two compressional one and a shear one. I think you get the point, so I have not the time to play too much, and I have taken some screenshots to show you some other example of what we can do with this game. This first screenshot is what the game looks like when we hit a second bonus and we get the knowledge about a new parameter, which is the open porosity. So we can discover a new material, which is a perforated plate or a facing, an acoustical facing. As according to the paper by Atala and Ansgar published in 2007, these are the two parameters, the static airflow resistivity and the open porosity, which are required to describe the complete behavior of a perforated plate or an acoustic facing. As the game continues, we get more and more bonuses, so we get the knowledge about more and more parameters, and we can discover new materials such as granular materials, foams. We also get bonuses that give us information about physical phenomena. Here I get a bonus which makes my particle enter inside a tortuosity area, so I have to go through this tortuosity area, which has a value of 1.43, and I will discover new physical phenomena or new materials. This is all I have to show you for this video game, and I will come to my conclusion. So I have added the times which are required to gain some information. Starting from the game perspective, we only take 5 minutes to get things about the acoustic of porous materials. It takes around 30 minutes to get information while reading a poster or some comics on the same topic. It takes 2 hours for a lecture. Of course, you get more information when attending a lecture, but it's more time to spend on it, and of course it takes longer to read books, like example 1 day to read a chapter of a book. Of course you will gain more information by reading books, but if you have to catch the attention of students, we can try by starting with a game, and then if it piques their curiosity, they will probably open a poster or a comics book on this topic, or attend a 2 hours lecture and discover new things, and then they will read by themselves a chapter of a book. So this was the last slide of my presentation, and I welcome your comments on Twitter or by email. Thank you for your attention.